Hey everyone, this is Quentin Figueroa with SlayerMint.com, and in this video I wanted to talk to you about outgrowing religion without letting go of God. And now I find this as a pretty important topic. It's a really important topic to myself, and I think one that I could help a lot of people out with and maybe shed some light on. I think with a lot of people, kind of, especially more millennials, people growing up kind of around the internet and that type of thing, you have access to a lot of information and to a lot of contrary information, to information that kind of presses up against the religion that you might be born into. And it kind of gives you a different perspective than maybe people of previous generations and this type of things. You kind of come at it with a different view, and you kind of might, be inclined to leave your religion. You might see, problems with it, and you might kind of not fully know the best way to handle that and what to do about that. And coming through a similar experience, I want to share some thoughts on that and hopefully clear some stuff up and make these things like more understandable for people. So, because we've seen it to where religious people, like in our everyday lives, you have it to where like a lot of people are religious, they'll go to church, but yet they don't really change themselves and they don't really take it that serious, right? So you might read the scripture, or you might just try to become a better person and help people and do things that you're taught that are right. But then a lot of people don't, and they're like hypocrites, and they use religion not as a tool to make themselves better, but rather as an excuse to just remain worse. And that is, I think, what a lot of people see, and then it kind of turns you off from religion. You're like, well, these people don't care. It's kind of weird. Here I am, just like, so it puts you in a weird predicament, kind of. So that's kind of what I want to address. Now, so when we're talking about God, God is too big for any one religion. There's no religion that has a monopoly on God, because religion is a man-made concept, right? And I'm sure we're all familiar with this, where, you have a certain religion that you might be born into, right? Like, in Western, like America, like, a lot of people are Christians, right? That's kind of this society. Now, like, people are born into a religion, and you're taught that your religion is the one true religion, and all the other religions are mythology, right? And then conversely, these people with other religions, they're taught that they're the one religion that's true, and your religion and everyone else's is mythology, right? So to us, our religion is history, and everyone else's is mythology, and it's vice versa. And it's kind of interesting thing to think about, because they can't all be right? You can't have it to where every religion is the one true one. So then it's like, it brings about the question, well, which one is it? What is the right religion? What is the true one? And now we have to understand that religion itself, like I said, it's man-made. So you have Christianity. That was not started by Jesus. Christianity was not started by Jesus. Buddhism was not started by Buddha. Islam was not started by Muhammad. These are all religious institutions that start after kind of these spiritual figures. These people might have kind of insights and they might have teachings, but then after these people teach, the followers of them then decide, okay, let's put this into an actual religion. So these people themselves weren't even the religion that that is represented by them. So that's something you have to realize also. So what happens with religion is, it has a lot of helpful elements for people kind of when they're starting out in life, or when they're at like a certain stage in life. So with children, I think religion can be quite beneficial for them, because they're picking up kind of moral principles to live by, right? They're learning kind of self-responsibility. They're learning honesty and integrity. They're learning conscientiousness, and they're learning how to love other people. And, things like this, which I think all of us could agree are very favorable traits. So most religions, do want to make people better, and they do want to teach these types of things. And for children and earlier, like beginner religious people, it can be very helpful and a great thing. But I think the problem with religion, what happens is, religion isn't built like academia, or like with our school system. Religion only really has one grade, and you just group everyone into that one grade, right? And then, so if you have like our school system, you have like different grades, right? You might be in first grade, and then you'll move on to second grade, once you learn that curriculum, once you master that grade, or at least you can pass it, then you kind of move on to third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, and we have it kind of split up where things we learn academically are more grouped into similar categories, to where you don't have like advanced students, like you don't have some college student that's doing calculus in first grade doing, addition and subtraction. You separate them so that you're not holding the advanced students up, and you're not pushing the less advanced students, you're not like pushing them too far and moving them too fast where they don't get it. So that's kind of why we do this, and it makes sense. But now with religion, we don't do that necessarily. We pretty much put everybody in the same grade. So you might have some, it doesn't have to do with age really, but you might have like some young guy, like, I don't know, some kid who's like 18 or something. And then you might have some 60-year-old, and the 60-year-old has like mastered the religion. They're like super, like, they're a very like good person. They live very well. They understand things. They get it. And then the 18-year-old like doesn't give a crap, and he's, doesn't get it at all. And that's like, these people are at completely different levels. It's like a first grader versus a college student, but yet you're putting them in the same religion, and you're treating them kind of the same way. And you're also in a way giving them the same story. You're giving them the same similar interpretations of the stories, rather than kind of giving a higher level interpretation to the more advanced religious student. So that is something that happens with religion. That's a problem that needs to be addressed, I think. We need to kind of understand that people are at different levels when we're talking about this stuff. And what happens is with religion, you don't really move on. You don't really graduate religion. You just kind of sit there and fester in a lower level ideology, a lower level kind of philosophy and way to live, rather than kind of moving on like, you do in other parts of life. And now as Christians, I think I can speak pretty well for Western society. A lot of people are born into Christianity, and, you kind of grow up with that. And I think for a lot of people, it leaves a bad taste in their mouth, because there's obviously favorable aspects, but then there's these other parts that are just kind of weird. Like they'll say, like, at least more of the Christian church will say, like, the earth is 6,000 years old. And people are like, okay, science is over here saying it's approximately 4.5 billion years old. Church says it's 6,000 years old. It's like, I don't think the Christian thing is really making much sense. And then, you'll kind of point these things out, and people get kind of turned off by it. Christians don't really want to fight you on it, at least most of them. And they don't really have answers. At least most of them don't have like good answers for this. They say, like it's faith or something like that. And it turns like more technical, kind of rational people off. And that's why you'll have people that might grow up, Christian, and they're like, screw this. These people are kind of dumb. I'm just going to become an atheist. So you have people that basically throw all of religion out, right? So like we're talking about outgrowing religion. They just basically throw it all away, leave all of it, and just say, screw this. Like atheism's where it's at. I'm anti-religion, or I'm like, I'm atheist. And then you have kind of other people that are like, well, I don't really know about this religious thing. It's kind of weird. This other stuff, this science stuff, and these other like forms of learning, these like nobody really knows. We're all just kind of like speculating. They're like, forget this. I'm agnostic. Like, I don't know, but like neither do you guys. So screw this. And you get kind of that. So you get this exodus where you become like atheistic or agnostic, and you kind of step away from religion. And I think that might not necessarily be the best way to approach this. I think there's ways you could kind of merge everything together in a way where you don't necessarily have to it might be okay to throw away religion, but you don't need to throw away God or other components of religion that are possibly true. So I kind of want to walk through that with you guys a little bit. Now, when you're stepping away from religion, because I think what happens is you go through your life a little bit, you start to see kind of contradictory information. Like for me, I was born a Christian, and I believed in Jesus because that's what my parents believed and still do, and that's what they kind of taught me, and that's what I learned about, and that's fine. That's kind of how culture and growing up works. And now, so I'm like, okay, yeah, I believe in Jesus. And like when you're a kid, that's fine. But when you get a little bit older, and you're talking to people, it's like, well, why do you believe in Jesus? And then that's where you're kind of at a crossroads. You're like, okay, well, now I need to actually understand what this Jesus is and why I believe in it, right? Why I believe in my religion, and be able to kind of explain it to people in a way that makes sense to them. And that's where you kind of reach a crossroads. You're like, okay, well, I can give them this Jesus story, and some people, yeah, it might satisfy, but a lot of people, it's not going to make sense to them, and it won't necessarily satisfy them. And it's like, well, do you kind of leave this like unsatisfactory version and just go along with your life holding on to this like Jesus story, thinking like, well, it's not like totally perfect, it doesn't totally fit? Or do you just throw it away completely and just say like, screw this, I'm just going to walk away from it, right? So it's like, you got to figure out how you want to balance it, if you do, or kind of where you like, how you put it all together, and what you keep and what you discard. And I think this is an important point to be in, because I think not just in religion, but in all like self-improvement parts of life, you kind of reach this stage where you're confused. You're not necessarily sure, and you really have to kind of figure it out. And there's not necessarily a group or a institution that can answer it for you. And this, from my understanding, is what actually Christians are talking about when they say being born again. This is where you actually step outside of your religion and you move over to spirituality, right? So religion is group-based. Spirituality is individual-based. And we all, as we grow, it's kind of our journey to become more individual-based, where we hold power over ourselves. The whole purpose is to become independent, self-responsible human beings ourselves that aren't dependent on other people. It's not bad to be dependent. It's not bad, obviously, to work with other people, but you have more power and you're living at a higher level if you control your own destiny rather than somebody else. And when you're part of a religion, they're, giving you rules, and they're kind of controlling, or at least kind of, showing you this is the way things are done. And then when you go outside of that, religions don't usually like that, And the thing is, like the real religious teaching or the real spiritual message is to go outside that and to become your own individual entity, your own individual person with your own power, to have your own self-responsibility and to have your own ideas and your own thoughts, and to, live by your own standards. I'm not saying go against God or things like this, but you're able to not have to be part of the group, and you can be like an adult. You don't have to be like a child who's dependent on their parent. And so that's an important thing to think about here, is that when we're outgrowing religion, we're moving away from this group of religion into this self-rule, which is more of a spiritual way of living. And it's tricky because I don't think a lot of people want to do this because it's challenging. Now, rather than being able to give your mistakes, off onto, like, say, Jesus, right? So you make a mistake and you're like, well, that's okay. I have a sin nature. I'm a sinner. Yeah, but Jesus helps me with that. Jesus, it's okay for me to sin because I can't be perfect like Jesus. So, he makes up for that. And I think a lot of people do stuff like that, and they'll do it just with like religion or their priest in general. It's like, yeah, like I'm making this mistake, but my priest says it's okay. So, talk to them. And they put it off onto somebody else. They're putting off responsibility and accountability onto somebody else rather than saying like, you know what? I did this mistake. I did this thing that hurt another person. I'm accountable for it. I'm going to change and not do that again. That's something a lot of people don't want to do because you need to be honest. You need to change. You're accountable. This is like hard stuff, but this is like real philosophy. This is like real religion. And I don't think a lot of people really approach it this way for obvious reasons. And this is kind of why people want to stick part of the group, because it's easy. It's like, yeah, it's like, this is cool. It's like, I get to go here, not really care about what I do. I can do whatever I want to do. Who gives a damn? And it's an easy life. You don't have to actually improve or change. And most people do not like change and they'll fight it. Okay, so we move on then to kind of the purpose of religion. So why are people religious at all? Why do you even follow a religion? Well, there's different reasons for people, but in general, I think most of us has seen that you have different camps. You have people that are religious not because they care about the virtue part, but because they just follow rules, because it's like that is what their tribe has always done. That's always been the procedure, and they just kind of go along to get along. It's like, I was born into this religion, it's right, screw you if you think I'm wrong, if I'm wrong. And so they just do what they've always done, and they just follow their parents, and it's tribal. This is again like group based. They just kind of do what they're told and stick within the constraints of the religion, afraid and fearful to go outside of the religion and explore kind of other ideas. And it's like with a lot of religious people, it's like, do you care more about becoming a better person, or do you care more about going to heaven? And most people don't care about becoming better. They just want to get into heaven. They just want to have a good afterlife. They don't care much about this life. It's like, I don't care about becoming better. I'm not going to ever be perfect. Let's just get me that ticket to heaven. And that's what a lot of people do, and I think it's an interesting way to look at it. It's the same thing like when they go to church. A lot of people are going to church not to get the message and not to learn. They're going to church because they feel guilty not to go. They think if they don't go to church, they're bad, and it's going to take away points towards scoring in heaven. It's like, if I don't go to church, I'm not going to go to heaven. If I don't go to church, I'm a bad person. I feel guilty for not going to church. And it's like, these are the reasons a lot of people do stuff. It's more like rote, tribal reasons, fear-based reasons, rather than reasons out of love or peace or maturity or anything like this. It's a totally different standard of why people are religious. And I think if we look at that, we can understand kind of what's going on here. And this is interesting because you see kind of a lot of religious people that are very, they might come across loving and kind of faith-based and that, but then when you hit them with more rational concepts, like why do you guys have circumcision? Why do you say the earth is 6,000 years old? There's so many things that you can hit most religious people with. And they don't as much have rational responses. But then you kind of have this other camp of atheists, right, where they are more rational, but maybe they're not as loving, or maybe they're not as faith-based, or maybe they only go off data and they kind of are a little bit naive. So these are interesting things to kind of think about when we're talking about this topic. And I think Manly P. Hall gives a really good quote here where he talks about how kind of we are, like, how we're to grow from this and how this all kind of fits in. And he says this, quote, "It has been said that wisdom lies not in seeing things, but in seeing through things." Right? Now, this is a really important quote where, we've all kind of heard this type of thing, like being able to read between the lines, where you have kind of more naive people that might just kind of take things at face value, but that might not necessarily be the real reality behind it or the real truth of the matter. And, people that are generally more wise can kind of see through things. They can see beyond like the surface level interpretation. And when we're looking at religion, and, most things in general, but when we're looking at religion, we need to kind of think this in mind. And when we're going through the rest of this topic, this is a really important quote and concept, because this is very true with how this stuff works. It's like you have kind of the surface level view of things, of like biblical stories and stuff, but then you have this kind of deeper way to look at stuff. And I want to really make sure that we go into that. And I'm going to hit on kind of the next topic. Okay, so now we need to talk about resolution and clarity, which is an important part of all this. When we look at certain events or certain people or information, we view it at a certain resolution that's kind of relative to where we're at in wisdom and growth and understanding. So we're going to view certain events and things differently than other people might, and we all kind of have different takes on things based on where we're at. And I think a good way to look at this is with video games. Now, when I was growing up, I played a lot of video games. I really liked them. And I'm sure many people listening also enjoy video games and play them. So with video games, we've seen kind of a progression in resolution as these systems have advanced, right? So the earlier video games like the Atari and the NES, these systems, they had pretty low resolution graphics, right? They're very blocky, and there's not like a lot of detail to them. Like when you have a character like Mario on the screen, maybe like 50 pixels make them up, and you kind of use your imagination and say, yeah, okay, this looks like a human, I guess, but it's, it's more like a representation of it from the pixels, and you just kind of go with it. It's not that detailed, right? And then as video games get more advanced and as they evolved, the resolution got better, and now when you look at a video game, it's very photorealistic. It looks very real. You look at it and you're like, okay, wow, there's a lot of detail there. It looks just like, almost like this video. It's like, that's really good resolution, right? So you have this kind of going on. And let me show you kind of an example, okay? So if you look at right now, you have, a low resolution version right here, where it's obviously you're not able to make out much. You can see that it's a face and whatnot, but there's not a lot of detail, right? And if you look next to it, there is a lot of detail. You can see that this is very photorealistic, and it looks a lot better than the low resolution version, obviously. And then also this one here, you can see that you once again have kind of on the left a low resolution version where Lara Croft, like her boobs are like a triangle. There's not a lot going on there. And then on the right here, you can see like there's a lot more detail. It looks a lot better. It's just higher resolution, right? And so with this kind of stuff, you can see that this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how this applies to just resolution in general, and how this is how we view life and how we take in information, and it applies with us, right? So these video game systems, they're made up of hardware and software, right? Video games use hardware and software, and that it can be likened to us, where we have a physical body, which is our hardware. And then we also have a software component, which we are formatted with through our culture, through our government, and other institutions. These tribal beliefs that get embedded in us. And this is our software. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that we are, formatted with software, because there's, important kind of things we need to learn and basic stuff we need to know as humans, and that's kind of what our culture gives us. The problem, of course, is that our tribe, our software, it doesn't always have it right? Like our parents don't know everything, our schools don't know everything, our religion doesn't know everything. They give us kind of the best that they know at the time, at the resolution that they kind of have. And, the parents that give it to us at their resolution. So we're getting it kind of like a certain way, but of course it can't all be right. And there's a quote here by Buckminster Fuller where he says, quote, "I have spent most of my life unlearning things that were proved not to be true," end quote. And it's a very true quote, because that's what we spend a lot of our lives doing. Like we'll be formatted with certain beliefs from our religion and whatnot, and we'll start to investigate it more, and just through life in general, like, well, that's kind of BS. I got to get rid of that. And we just kind of start getting rid of more and more things as we go through life, because not a lot of them add up. And it's almost like majority of what we know is not true, and it's just like crap, and it's like we almost just got to wipe the slate clean and start over. And again, it's not like it's bad to have these beliefs that we're born into, because it's like maybe it's like you need them for a time, but then there becomes a time where now you've outgrown them, you're ready to take the training wheels off and move on, and now you're ready to kind of get a new set of beliefs, so you're able to kind of move on. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, and that's what's going on here, right? And yeah, people start at different levels. Like some people are, we have different hardware. Some people are more, better at certain things. Some people might be more quick-witted or certain technical things. Some people might be physically better at certain things. So there's different aspects to our hardware, right? And same with our software. Certain software that we're formatted with, certain cultures have certain beliefs that may be better in certain areas, not as good in other areas. So we have this disparity, and the point is that not that we start kind of at different levels, but that we have the ability to grow forward and move forward from those levels. So it's we might start here, but we can end up here. We might start higher or lower, but it's what do we add? What things do we get rid of? What do we do with our current beliefs to move forward, and that kind of thing. And that's kind of the important thing to talk about here, because we decode reality at the level of resolution that we have. If we have a low resolution, we're going to decode very blocky, very like the NES or the Atari. It's going to come at us like with not a lot of detail. Where if we have a higher resolution, we're going to decode reality with much more detail and kind of have much more understanding. And the important thing to realize with all this is the most important operating system, it's not your phone, it's not your computer, it's you. You are the most important OS because you're the one that's like you're using on a daily basis, and then it's kind of important to make sure you're running updated. And it's interesting because most of us are running with like a lot of bugs, a lot of viruses, and we just really haven't had any updates in a while, right? Some of us need a critical security update. We're running 2,000-year-old religion that is, could be hindering us in certain ways now, and it's like time for a security update. So this is what's going on with us and our software. Now, when people view like an event, for an example, you can have an event like religion A attacking religion B, right? And if you have a low resolution person viewing this event, they're going to take a low resolution kind of interpretation, right? So they're going to say, okay, religion A attacks religion B. That is bad. That's bad that they're attacking. That's bad news. And that's it. It's like, good or bad. It's binary. It's very low resolution. It's black or white. That's it. And there's not much more else going into it, right? And then if a higher resolution person views that same event, they're going to be like, okay, religion A attacking religion B. And they're going to say, okay, well, let's look at this. Why are they attacking them? Like, who is religion A? Who's religion B? And like, what is causing this? Maybe they've seen this type of scenario before where one group attacks another group. And they're like, okay, well, I have pattern recognition. I can recognize this type of pattern before. I've seen it. So they're able to associate kind of other information they have in other events. And then maybe they might take like a higher resolution of just like group A and say like, okay, well, group A, who's attacking, it's made up of 1,000 people, it's made up of 1,000,000 people. And of these 1,000,000 people, let's say only 100 of them control it at the top. And then under them, you have all these other people that just kind of take orders and obey them. So you have kind of, let's maybe then focus on these 100 people and then maybe look into their backgrounds and see what's motivating them. And it's like, so you can really get detailed, right? You can really get a high resolution version of this. And that is what some people do. Like higher resolution people are going to view an event at a higher resolution and get more information and more data. And inevitably, this leads to more accuracy. You're going to have a better assessment. This is no different than somebody like Sherlock Holmes. Right? Somebody who's good and trained and well-educated and experienced in their profession is going to have a lot better view on information than somebody who's not. So if Sherlock Holmes walks into a crime scene, they're going to immediately kind of like just be picking up on clues intuitively and instinctually and just kind of knowing like through experience, like, okay, this guy's over here, this happened here, they did it at this time, why is this guy doing this? And it's just like all going to start to add up and immediately like kind of know like, alarm bells are going to be going off because of past experience and pattern recognition and things like this. This is high resolution. This is interpreting events like at a high level. And professionals do this. People that are experienced in areas do this. And, if you are more experienced in kind of religion or philosophy, this type of stuff, you're going to kind of see a higher resolution and get more data and have like a broader perspective and not be as naive. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. And it's interesting because, of course, we see this, or we kind of know this because even with like something like a dog. So if you want a dog to like jump through a hoop, you might more just give the dog the low resolution version, which is like, here's a nice freaking wiener for you to eat. Here's like a treat. So you're here dangling a treat for the dog and you're trying to get him to do something. The dog, being, less intelligent than humans, I think most people would agree with that, is looking at the wiener and it's just very short-sighted and it's very narrow and low resolution. It's like, boom, I want the wiener, I'm going for the wiener. And it doesn't even care about like any of the other repercussions. It's just going to follow it around and like, let me get the freaking treat, man. So that is what's going on. And it's like, you have this higher resolution understanding of like, well, the wiener is going to lead to this dog going through the hoop. Like you're seeing more clarity, but the dog's not. And it's not just with animals. Same thing happens with people, less intelligent people. Like even with children. Children are generally naive, right? You can get children to do things with candy. It's like a common meme. It's like kids want to they like candy And you can manipulate children. You can manipulate them with other ways too. They're not able to kind of see through things like Manly P. Hall talks about. They're looking at kind of like a literal level. So that's kind of what's going on here. And let's go on to the next topic. Okay, let's talk about why people might be fearful of leaving religion. So we need to look at this from a clarity and a resolution standpoint. When you gain more understanding in a topic and you gain more clarity, it shouldn't be uncomfortable, or it shouldn't at least be something that hurts you. It should be helpful. It should be liberating. It should answer questions and be something that's enjoyable to you, right? It shouldn't be something that hurts you and adds more fear or adds more anger. Good information should help you. Like this video, for example, should be something that helps you if it's hitting on topics that kind of apply to you. It should be something that's helpful and that moves you forward. It shouldn't be painful and something that hurts. So when we're talking about this stuff, we need to kind of look at it that way. So with people who might not want to leave religion, they have a certain view, like with heaven and hell and the afterlife. And it's hard to leave religion because it's well, what's going to happen in the afterlife if I leave religion? It's I believe in, going to heaven, and I want to go to heaven. So if I leave, it's I don't want to go to hell. So why would I want to leave religion? And with Christians, it's they have this belief in Jesus, and Jesus is your way into getting into heaven. So it's if I leave religion, I leave Jesus, and therefore I leave being able to go to heaven. So you have this kind of low resolution version of certain topics where Jesus is tied in with religion and the afterlife is tied in with religion. And it creates a way of a fear of leaving religion because this kind of puts you in a hard predicament if you're out of religion because so much weighs on the afterlife. And then also you have just in general family and friends. Your whole social circle has been built up around your religion, right? Your spouse is probably going to be the same religion as you. Your children, most likely, same religion. Your friends, a lot of them are going to be similar religion, So a lot of the events and group things you do with people, they're tied to your religion. And this, I think, makes it a challenge for a lot of people to walk away from it because it's you have to kind of decide. Do I care more about upgrading my resolution and learning more on something, or do I care more about keeping my friends and family and this life I have? You might have this comfortable life, things might be going well, for the most part, and it's do you shake that foundation to upgrade your resolution and understanding in things, or do you just stay more comfortable? And it's that's a predicament people are in, and it's not an easy answer or an easy topic, but a lot of people are in that predicament. And it's important to recognize that you have this fear to leave religion because it has this strong hold on you that we put on ourselves. And we have to understand that these concepts like the afterlife or Jesus, these have been branded by the church and by our religions. And it's these, just as they don't have a monopoly on God, religion doesn't have a monopoly on concepts like the afterlife or Jesus. It's you can get information on these topics outside of religion that could give you a higher resolution on how this works, to where it might make it easier or more comfortable to leave religion without having to kind of jump off the deep end and go and get rid of everything. It's so if we could just gain in resolution to where we actually refine our religion rather than throw it away, that could actually be quite helpful. And I think that's something that people might want to do, because you have, atheist type people. They'll just throw it all away and say, screw it, I'm out of here. But maybe it's more beneficial to kind of work with it and see if maybe there's a deeper interpretation of this that we could kind of look into and, have it to where we could kind of get a little bit of everything. So I kind of want to go into that. Okay, so if we look at religious literature in general, you have scriptures like the Bible and different texts that there's lots of stuff. They talk about different stuff, stories, events, whatever. So a lot of it, you might read through it and it might come across weird. So you're is this literal? And it's well, these stories seem kind of weird. So I don't know if it's literal or what. And I think a lot of people correctly see that, there's allegories and it's metaphoric. And not everything in the Bible or religious text is literal, but it's telling a story to get a point across. It's not trying to actually give an accurate representation of history necessarily or an event. So there's this kind of thing. Yeah, of course, lots of parts are literal and they should be taken literally, and that's what's going on. But there's also the allegoric, metaphoric aspect where it's more like a lesson and it's more kind of giving an example of something. And of course, you also have where it's both, where it can be taken kind of at different levels depending on your resolution or your clarity. And I talked about this in a previous video with the fall of man, where you have this falling man event that can be taken at lots of different levels. You have like a low resolution level version of it, and then you have a high resolution version of it that can be understood, I think, accurately at both levels. They both have value, and there's, different ways to view it. And it's not just two, there's multiple levels to that story and other stories as well. There's different interpretations that you can get out depending on your, current resolution, your current understanding and whatnot. And so I want to read to you an important quote by Manly P. Hall where he kind of mentions this and talks about it because it should hopefully give you a little bit of insight into what's going on here. Okay. So Manly P. Hall says, quote, "It is important next to realize that the secret doctrine concealed in the Bible must be discovered with the aid of certain keys. Each of the myths, fables, and symbolic figures has at least 7 complete and distinct interpretations. In other words, to open the door, that is, unveil the secret, the key must be turned 7 times in the lock. It may seem strange that one story or account may have several meanings, but such is the working of the Kabbalah. In the original Hebrew, there were numerical and letter ciphers to aid in the decoding of the hidden information. Translation and editing have destroyed these older Kabbalistic patterns, and it is now necessary to have recourse in the fascinating field of comparative religion in order to unlock the biblical secrets." End quote. Okay, so that right there is a very interesting and important quote because he's talking about this. He's talking about how there's different interpretations, and even like in the more original versions, before they had like a lot of tampering and whatnot, they were more concealed and they were more kind of they had more like multiple meanings, and they kind of were more purposely done in a way to where different levels can interpret it different ways. So that's what he's talking about here. Like you have beginner students, they're going to get the beginner version, right? So when you walk into Sunday school as a kid and they tell you this version of the Garden of Eden, it's like that's the story you get. You get this, Adam and Eve ate this apple and disobeyed God. And that's, the low resolution beginner story of the fall of man. And there's value in it, of course. It's talking about disobedience, which, that could be a bad thing in a lot of ways. So there's not to say there's no value in it. It's just giving you this kind of low-level interpretation and a low-level understanding. And I think the problem is a lot of us get stuck with this low-level interpretation and we never actually move on. We just hold on to these versions that we learned in Sunday school without actually adding to it or refining it or getting greater depth from it, right? So that is something that I think is important to understand. Because when we grow, we usually become kind of less literal. We usually kind of have more like openness or discernment. We're able to kind of not necessarily be so judgmental or so like nitpicky. And I talk about this in another video with the MBTI, where just personality types in general, where you have this dichotomy between sensors and intuitives, right? On one end, you have sensors. They're very literal. They're very concrete. They take things at face value. They go off their 5 senses. It's kind of what you would expect. And this is not a bad thing. It obviously has applications and a lot of value in many aspects of life. So it's not bad to be this way. And on the other hand, you have intuition, which is more open. It's able to kind of like associate information together. It's able to look at kind of a broader perspective. And as I've been talking about, you're able to kind of see through things. You're able to kind of read between the lines. You're not just looking at this surface level, but you're actually digging deeper and kind of getting more meaning out of something. And that is what I think we need to do with religion itself and with these topics. And that's what Manly P. Hall was talking about, where you turn the key and you get a deeper interpretation. You get like a more hidden meaning out of something. So that is what's going on here. And yeah, of course, we see this with children because they're kind of more sensing in a lot of ways. They're quite naive, like I've talked about. They're kind of easy to manipulate because they don't have as much experience or wisdom to kind of know what might happen with something. They can't recognize patterns the same way an adult can. So you have this kind of difference where children are kind of naive and they come across like sensing like. And I think a lot of us remain children, or we think like children, low resolution when it comes to religion. We kind of have this like naive version of it, but we don't really kind of see deeper or associate like with other religions. We don't compare like, well, what does this other religion have to say about this particular thing? What does this other religion say about the afterlife? It's like we don't do comparative study in religion, so it's like we're going to be stuck with this shallow little narrow view of it. And it's like, why not be scientific about something, take in all the data, and then figure out what makes sense? Why just stick with one thing? If we're trying to learn how to cook, we don't just read one cookbook and say, I'm a cooking expert. No, we read lots of cookbooks. We cook a lot of food. We like immerse ourselves in it to where we have a broader understanding, and we're not just like naive. We're not just super literal about like one thing, right? So that is kind of what I want to go into as we move forward here. And an important part is that a lot of this information might come across as like out there or just like crazy, or like this guy's like another one of these like idiot guys or something. And I think it's important when you come across information that might like kind of shock you or like sound out there. I think it's important to not immediately discard it. I think that's what a lot of people do, like more literal people. They'll just like immediately like throw it away and be like, this is wrong, done. Because I mean, everybody has like some value to offer. Like I'm obviously not 100% right on what I'm talking about, and neither are you. But you have something to offer that I don't, and I have something to offer that you don't, most likely. So it's like, I think what we need to do is when somebody offers information that might kind of hit you in a weird way, just rather than discarding it, just hold on to it and be like, I'm going to hold this in my crazy folder or my not sure folder, but just file it mentally and hold on to it and just wait on it. Maybe right now is not the time for it to like click, right? Maybe you're missing other pieces that will tie into it at some point to where now this one finally fits into place and you're like, okay, now I see where that goes, right? So you don't need to just like get rid of everything. You can just hold on to it and think to yourself like, maybe they didn't say it the right way. Maybe they're using different terminology for expressing something, but it doesn't have to be taken at face value, and you can wait on it and refine it and work with it. And with time, it might fall into a place that is in alignment with the way you view things and with your like truth foundation. So that's an important thing to think about as we discuss these topics. So with that said, let's move forward a bit. Okay, now let's move on to heaven, hell, and the afterlife. So I think this is probably the main part of religion that keeps people from outgrowing it, because, there's this afterlife thing. It's really important. We don't know much about it, but it kind of matters what happens, right? Because like we're going to be spending eternity in an afterlife, and it's like, well, we better kind of figure this out or do it right. We don't want to spend eternity in somewhere we don't want to go, right? So it's like, if we're good and we do good, we're going to be in heaven eternally, and if we're bad, we're going to be in hell eternally, or some type of thing like that, a bad place or a good place, and that is important to a lot of people. And I think that's why this is a hard topic for people to kind of talk about or refine or view from a higher level of understanding. So this is important, and this is also something with Christians where they will throw Jesus into the mix, and now you need Jesus to enter heaven. And if you need to walk away from Jesus, or if you need to refine your view on Christianity, it's like, well, you don't want to give up Jesus because you want to go to heaven. It's like, are you stupid? So why would you ever walk away from Christianity? So this, I think, is a conundrum that a lot of people find themselves in, and I want to address it. So I think we first need to realize that obviously religion isn't the only place to turn to when we're talking about this stuff. There are lots of things outside of religion that talk about the afterlife, right? We have near-death experiences. We have out-of-body experiences. We have Kundalini experiences. You can meditate. You can pray about it. You can read other literature outside of just religious literature about it. You can look into scientific matters on this type of stuff. So there is lots of information on the afterlife outside of just religion. Religion does not have a monopoly on it. And there's ways to grow your resolution and clarity in it outside of just resolution. So that's an important thing to talk about just in general. But if we're going to look at it from a religious perspective to start out, let's take a look at that. Now, there's two main camps when it comes to religion, to the afterlife with religion. You have kind of this Western Abrahamic tradition, and you have kind of this Eastern tradition, right? So in the West, you have the Abrahamic religions of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, that all kind of teach a one life and then afterlife for eternity type concept, right? And then you have this Eastern side of things with like Buddhism and whatnot, where you're going to have multiple lives, right? Reincarnation. So you have this kind of huge difference between these two schools of religious philosophy, where you're on one side, you live one life, and what you do there determines where you end up. The other one, you live multiple lives, and with each life, you're perfecting yourself to where you can eventually evolve yourself out of the need to be reincarnated and the need to live physical experiences. So that's kind of what these are talking about. Now, if you look at it at a surface level, it's going to create a contradiction. These two things are going to appear to be at odds, and you're going to be like, well, they obviously disagree with each other. Which one's right? Who's got it right? So now, this is where we kind of have to put on our like high resolution cap. This is where we need to kind of look between the lines. This is where we need to kind of look beyond the surface level interpretation and see what's going on here. So this is what we're going to do. So the Bible itself isn't entirely clear on the concept of heaven or hell. There's no like definitive definition where it goes into detail like this is what heaven is, this is what hell is. Most of what we know about heaven or hell isn't from the Bible, it's from our church, from our religious institution. They kind of tell us stuff the same way they tell us as the fallen man story. We get our information secondhand from priests rather than from our scripture or from ourselves. So you already have this kind of branding from the church on what these terms mean and what these concepts are about. But the thing is, the church only has certain texts, and the Bible only has certain texts in it, right? So when the Bible was created, first of all, it was written by many different authors over a long span of time. So it's not just like one person just wrote it and it's like, boom, here it is. It's not like God wrote it or, things like that. It was compiled with different authors who had different beliefs and different understandings over a period of time. And then in 325 with the Council of Nicaea, when Constantine assembled a group to kind of put it together, they had scribes that were determining like which ones do we keep in, which ones do we not keep in. It's like what makes sense, and they kind of had to figure it out and do what they thought would work, right? So the Bible isn't one like complete thesis. It's different scriptures, and there's scriptures outside of the Bible that still have valuable information to talk about. There's scriptures that were not included, like in the 6th century, we know that certain concepts in the Bible were purposefully sequestered or kind of concealed, and that is reincarnation. Reincarnation itself isn't as much pushed by the church, even though earlier it was not like unheard of to talk about reincarnation. So like this type of thing also evolves. Like right now, like all of our Bibles are built off of the King James Bible. The King James Bible didn't come into existence until 1611. So it is relatively new considering all the past stuff that happened, right? You had Christianity that started after Jesus' death, roughly. And then it wasn't until about 325 where the state comes in and says, you know what? We're going to create Catholicism, which means universal, because they wanted to universalize religion and put it under governmental control. Because, of course, you never had a religion that's not a little political. You never had a political movement that's not a little religious. So Rome and the Caesars of Rome put together Christianity, Catholicism, and this was a state religion that was now backed by the state and used for, control in, certain ways, for whether for better or worse. But, that is what's going on. Before that, you had a totally different type of Christianity going on, right? That was before Catholicism, Vatican Christianity. And then from there to 1611, you still have lots of different things going on. And frick, people couldn't even read like up until the Renaissance or so. People still couldn't even read, so they would just listen to what people tell them. They wouldn't even like read what was going on. They didn't have the capacity to. They had a very low resolution understanding of this stuff. So the point is, there's a lot of changes going on and a lot of information out there, and the church obviously doesn't have a monopoly on it. And there are lots of things to learn from places outside of just that. Like again, in 1945, a new set of texts were found called the Nag Hammadi Library. These are texts that were written during the time of Jesus, but were not read or discovered until 1945, like just recently, modern times. And these have a lot of good information and things that Jesus said. And it's like, well, we should take this and compare it to what Jesus is saying in the New Testament and what's going on there. So you have lots of good information to look at now. And it's like, did the priests who put together the Bible back then, did these scribes have access to the Nag Hammadi? Did they have access to the stuff we can go read on the internet freaking like instantly? It's like they had access to certain information, but did they have all the stuff we have? It's like, no. It's like they didn't have the broad view we have in the way that we can research it now. It's like we can be our own priest. We can be our own Vatican and really assemble what we want with our own texts. And then we can really figure out, what is this heaven and hell talking about? What is this afterlife talking about, right? Because the end say so on what you believe and what is right and what is true. It's not your religion. It's not the church. It's not your priest. It's you. You're the end say so on what's right. You don't need to go to your priest or your religion to figure something out. You can figure it out yourself the same way they did. Because when these scriptures were written, right, it's like, okay, this was the inspired word of God. You know, this was maybe written by like a spiritual master or some, high level guy or whatever. But it's like, this guy heard from God and understood the afterlife. It's like, well, why can't we do this today? It's like, why can't we hear from God? Why can't we be our own scribe? Why can't we get inspired from God and write about it? And it's like, we freaking can. It's just we choose not to and we don't. But we can do the very thing they were doing, and we can have access to the same information that they had, and we can be our own priest, and we can be our own person that figures out, and determines what's true and what's not. We don't need to go to somebody else. I mean, you can, but that's low resolution. Okay, so yeah, when we kind of understand that this is what's going on, it, begins to be a bit more clear why reincarnation might have been sequestered. Because, if you're trying to put together a state religion and you want to take a certain view on something, it might be more beneficial to do it this way and to kind of, we don't need to do reincarnation because it makes more sense to teach it this way for whatever reasons we're trying to create. So, that's what's going on. But the thing is, when you start to, if you view the concept of reincarnation as being something that's possible, or at least fits in, it starts to grow your resolution and it starts to clear up your clarity to where you're less fearful about things. Because it's like, without reincarnation, when you die, it's scary, because it's like, I better not mess up. I get this one shot, better not mess it up. But with reincarnation now, it's like, well, it's not as serious death, because it's like, well, yeah, okay, I'm going to die, but I'll be back. I can try again. I can work on myself. I can evolve again. It's like reincarnation starts to make things less fearful. It takes away fear and it brings in love, which I think is a mark of intelligence and a smart thing and like a true thing. So it's like you have this wisdom of understanding something better, to where now you remove this like low resolution fear-based belief and you replace it with a higher resolution love-based belief. And that's kind of what I'm talking about here, and how it ties in with the heaven and hell afterlife stuff. So this is a type of thing that brings together Eastern and Western religions. When you look at like a higher resolution, like rather than just taking like this slow level church view where there's heaven and hell, but you actually look at the broad scope of text beyond just the Bible, you look at what Jesus said outside of the Bible, like in the Nag Hammadi, you start to see that it fits more in with reincarnation, and that it isn't this like isolated thing. It's like the high level version isn't one life. It's more of a reincarnation. It's more of a like continuity of life type concept. And it brings together the religions. It brings together how these religions maybe aren't so separate. They actually are kind of saying the same thing, maybe in different ways. Now, this brings me to a quote from Jesus. There's two quotes, actually. And it's interesting to kind of think about these as we progress forward. So in Matthew 13:13, he says, "Therefore speak I to them in parables, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand." End quote. So here he is talking about how people, he's speaking them in parables, low-level information. He's giving them something that they can relate to and understand, because he can't just give them the full version of something, right? So here we go. He's talking about the kingdom of God. He says, this is Luke 17, verse 20 through 21. Jesus says, quote, and when he was demanded of the Pharisees, when he was demanded of the Pharisees, when the kingdom of God should come, he answered them and said, the kingdom of God cometh not with observation, neither shall they say, lo here, or lo there, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you. End quote. Okay, now this is an interesting quote, which we will kind of explore more as we go on. But what's he talking about within you? Like, the kingdom of God is within you? That sounds a lot different than saying the kingdom of God is in heaven, or it's an afterlife, or he's saying something that's kind of interesting. And it's if you explore other religions and other texts and other experiences and things, you start to kind of see what this stuff is hinting at. And I want to do that now. I want to move outside of religion a little bit, and let's look at near-death experiences, because I think they give you a lot of value in what is going on with religion and the afterlife. Okay, so near-death experiences are, of course, when somebody has a near-death experience. They're living and then they die. They're clinically proven dead for an amount of time. The time can vary between different people. And then they miraculously somehow come back to life. And when they come back to life, these people who've had near-death experiences have an experience. They have a story to share about what happened. And they're gone in a way, and then they're no longer, I guess, in this physical life. Maybe they're in their head, maybe they're in a spiritual world or some other density or something. But these people that are dead are experiencing some type of afterlife thing. They're in some area, there's some experience that they experience, and then they come back and talk about it. And it's interesting to note here, because these near-death experiences, they happen with any type of person. It's not only religious people who experience them, right? It could be a man, a woman, a child. It could be different races, black people, white people. It could be different religions. You can have Christians experience them, Muslims, but you could also have atheists experience them, and agnostics, gays, straight people. You can have blind people experience them, people who can't see. So these apply outside of kind of a physical level, or a physical preconceived concept. It's they go beyond that, and it's more than just that. So we have access to this information. You could go read about near-death experiences right now and see kind of what these people say. And if it's not just near-death experiences, like I said, there's other ways we can access information kind of outside of our immediate five senses, like with meditation or prayer or things like this. There's access to this stuff we can have. It's just a lot of us choose not to practice it or work with it to gain understanding. And that's fine, but that is what happens. Now, with NDEs, it's interesting because they all kind of say a similar story, which is interesting. It's Christians don't have a certain thing they say that is completely different than what other people say. There's a common theme between them all, which I think gives us a lot of insight into what actually is happening. And so they all report a feeling of love and peace and being at harmony and being connected with everything, right? And this just pure bliss that you don't feel in this physical world. This is what every NDE talks about. But now there's this one main central component, this one main central theme that applies to all of them. And this, I think, is one of the most important takeaways from all this. And that is that we create our own reality. Okay, so I know this might be a lot to take in, and you probably have alarm bells going off, and you're okay, this guy's new agey, this is one of those weird spiritual guys or whatever. But I don't think I don't think you should just discard it immediately. You should just kind of hold on to it a little bit. Just like if you're telling me something, I'm not going to discard it immediately. I'm going to kind of hear you out and see if I can kind of fit it in with what I believe. Because I'm obviously not paid to tell you this. I'm not trying to deceive anybody. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I'm trying to raise your resolution and to help you grow in clarity. Like when I first read about this kind of stuff, I had like a response like multiple responses kind of, but it was like, yeah, it goes against what you believe, like what you've been trained to believe. But at the same time, like at a higher level, it kind of makes sense. And it's like, oh, that's interesting because like if we create our own reality, it's like everything is like open, and it's like there's not just like one literal religion that kind of tells you the way it is. We all kind of have different components on the way we can fit in with this. So I'm not trying to deceive you. I'm trying to help your understanding grow so you can look at this in like a broader resolution to where you can gain more clarity, which will get rid of fear. I don't want you to be like fearful about what you currently believe. It's better to kind of understand something and be more at peace with it and kind of have a better understanding. And that's what this should do. It should be liberating or helpful as you fit it into place rather than being painful. So the main thing is you refine what you have. You don't throw it away. You refine it. There might be components of it, right? So like at a lower resolution, you might have it to where it's all just one pixel. But if you break it into two pieces, you might be able to remove one pixel and keep the other. And by doing so, you gain an understanding and you have more value with that. And now you have more accuracy. So that's what's going on here. So anyway, let's get back to the point of NDE. So you have it to where if you're a Christian, you see Jesus, right? If you're a Muslim, you see Muhammad. If you're atheist, you don't see either of them. And what I'm saying here is what's going on is you are seeing what you expect to see. You create your own reality. You are seeing the reality that you've created. And you've created that reality, not just here, but like however you live and whatever you do and whatever you think, that's reality you're creating. And it's not just a spiritual concept. It's not just non-physical, because we know this even in this physical world. If you think that you're going to be poor and you think that you're a victim and you're always sad about stuff and you're angry and you're pointing the finger at other people, you are creating that reality for yourself. You are creating like this victim reality, and you're going to get more of it. I've talked about this in other videos as well, where you basically, the energy that you put out, the energy and the thoughts you have and the vibration you have, that's what you're creating. And so we choose what we want to create just in this physical world. And if we're positive, and if we, believe that we can do things and we work towards them, and we change the way we view things to where we don't have like a mindset of a victim, but we have the mindset of like a person who can do things, a responsible person that's capable, you're going to be able to more easily do these things. These things are going to come about because that's kind of how things work. We create our reality. Our thoughts determine who we are. Like the difference between a poor person and a rich person isn't their wallet or their bank account. It's their thoughts. They think differently. Rich people and poor people think differently. I mean, not just rich and poor, lots of other ways in life. Different people think differently, and that's why they end up where they end up. Choices, things that you do. And it's not saying choices like, there's right choices and wrong choices, just saying the energy you put on something is going to determine kind of the effect you get of it. And that's what's happening with near-death experiences in this non-physical spiritual reality or whatever. The reality you create here, the things you believe, right? The religion that you are kind of taking in from your tribe and whatnot, and like, you believe in Jesus, you believe in an afterlife, you believe you'll see your loved ones when you die and all this stuff. That's what happens because that's the reality you've created. That is what you're building into, like your bank, into your spiritual bank or whatever. And that is what's going on. It happens not just here, but with near-death experiences. And it's interesting that the two corroborate each other. Rather than having this like confusing thing where you live once and then you die and that's it, boom. That's not what's going on. And it's not what's going on in this world. It's like everything kind of is fitting together in a broader way, which I think makes a lot more sense. Now, So with this, it allows you to kind of look at more religious concepts now, like heaven and hell, judgment day, and stuff like that. And you see here that there isn't a heaven or hell necessarily. There isn't a judgment day. The heaven or hell that we experience is the one that we build through our consciousness. It's like if we experience heaven or hell, it's something that we build for ourselves. It's like what Jesus is saying in that verse I read. The kingdom of God is within you. It's like you determine the heaven or hell that you're living in, whether in this life or whether in an afterlife or whatnot. You determine where you go based off your consciousness. You create your own reality. And that's kind of like the deeper meaning, the higher resolution meaning of what all this stuff is talking about, right? So let's go into another quote here from the Gospel of Thomas. And this now is from the Nag Hammadi, which is one of those books where it was discovered in 1945, and this kind of stuff is not in the Bible, but it has Jesus talking about stuff. So let's see what this has to say. It says, quote, Jesus saw some babies nursing. He said to his disciples, "These nursing babies are like those who enter the Father's kingdom." They said to him, "Then shall we enter the Father's kingdom as babies?" Jesus said to them, "When you make the two into one, and when you make the inner like the outer, and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower, and when you make the male and female into a single one, so that the male will not be male, nor the female be female, when you make eyes in place of an eye, a hand in place of a hand, a foot in place of a foot, an image in place of an image, then you will enter the kingdom." End quote. So this is an interesting quote because he sounds in this a lot more like kind of out there. It's a lot less literal. It's like really open, like, okay, make the male and female into one, when the outer is the inner is the outer. This is like that whole within you thing. This is like that whole, like what near-death experiences show us, being as one, being kind of connected and being tied to other things. And this is showing you kind of how this all relates at like a bigger perspective with reincarnation and with multiple lives, and how you might not just only be this one life or this one way, and you might experience kind of everything to where you see how everything fits in together. That's kind of what that is saying, and that's what I'm kind of getting at with this as well. It's that type of thing. So when you see that, you're turning that key a little bit more, and things are starting to make more sense. Now you don't just have to stop with what the Bible says. Now you can actually look at other information and like NDEs and like add to the Bible. You don't have to throw away the Bible and say it's wrong. You can just take a higher level interpretation of it and, look at more data and see what's going on here. And this, again, leaves me with a quote I like from Manly P. Hall, where he says, quote, "For lack of interreligious understanding, there has been very little religious understanding." End quote. And that's kind of what I'm talking about here, is if you don't compare notes and you don't take in lots of data, you're not going to really see what your religion itself is even saying. It's like you're not going to get it. So that's kind of my thoughts on the afterlife, heaven and hell, and how clearing that up now might allow you to kind of more easily be able to outgrow your religion and kind of move into like a higher level of understanding. Okay, now if that hasn't shaken you up enough, let's now move over to Jesus and the blood atonement and really shatter your belief system. Okay, so with Jesus, it's quite a controversial topic, and it's something that I've looked into a lot and struggled with myself a lot, because it's really important as a Christian, right? You're like, Jesus is the main thing. It's like you need Jesus to be saved, and this is important, so we don't want to get rid of him. And we got to be careful, like, kind of understanding this stuff. It's like really touchy subject. It's going to upset a lot of people. People have a lot of views on it and that kind of thing. So let's kind of go into that and talk about that. And keep in mind that I'm not trying to disprove Jesus. I'm not trying to say he didn't exist or anything like that. I'm not going to be annoying like that. I just want to try to refine your view of Jesus and give you kind of a better understanding, which might clear up some stuff and make it kind of easier for you to see how this fits in with religion and what religion is really saying and what Christianity is really saying about Jesus. So let's talk into that. Let's go move into that a little bit and see what's going on. Because when I was, younger, I believed in Jesus. And I would, that's what my parents taught me. That's what I was trained. That's what I was formatted with. And, it made sense. It's like, yeah, okay, Jesus, that's what my parents say. That makes sense. But then when you get older and you start talking to people, they'll press up on you and ask you like, okay, well, why do you need Jesus? Like, you might have like a Jewish friend. They're like, well, why do you need Jesus? I don't get it. And you kind of explain it to them. You tell them like the Christian thing, and they're like, that doesn't make sense to me. And so you're just sitting here like, okay. And then like somebody else might come and give you information that kind of might make sense to you, and it like disproves kind of what you believe. So it's like, now you're in a pickle. Do you take what they say and just kind of leave Jesus, or do you just kind of say, well, I don't know, they're probably not right. I'm just going to keep what I believe and just kind of hold on to it, knowing that it doesn't fully make sense to you. So you kind of have this conundrum that you're in. And that's what happens to people. It's what happened to me. And so you have to kind of understand what to do. But the thing is, I think there's a third option where you don't necessarily have to discard it. Or you don't necessarily have to just blindly believe it. I think there's a way where you can kind of take a higher level view of something, a less literal interpretation to where it can kind of make more sense and fit in with kind of a lot of other things and other religions and things that people are saying. So that's kind of what I want to do. Now, we know that Jesus was probably a real person that existed some 2,000 years ago or so. But the thing is, Jesus did not start Christianity. Christianity started after Jesus, right? So Jesus is a guy who had a message. And that message he had was kind of, I guess, continued on with Christianity, but him himself being a religious figure was not part of his message, right? That's something that Vatican Christianity created. Jesus was just a messenger giving a spiritual message like other kind of spiritual messengers, right? And if we look into, different texts, we kind of see this, right? You'll say like, okay, well then what was Jesus about? Well, it depends who you ask. Like if you look at the Bible, New Testament, they're going to give you one version of Jesus. The Nag Hammadi gives you another version. You have other books like the Colburn Bible. They give you another version of Jesus. And they all kind of sound different. They all give Jesus in different flavors, kind of relative to the resolution of the people that were interpreting Jesus from their perspective. So he's different depending on who you ask, and he kind of says different things. So you kind of got to look at this like we've been talking about in a broad perspective. Now, the main part with Jesus is, of course, the blood atonement aspect. And this is kind of the central thread that ties all denominations of Christianity together, right? So you have Catholicism, Protestantism, Calvinists, Lutherans, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses. These different denominations all believe in this blood atonement, and that's kind of the main part behind them all. They might quibble over different details and whatnot, but they believe that you need Jesus to be saved. So this is kind of the big thing. So we need to be saved through Jesus. So what does that mean? Why do we need to be saved? Saved from what? So this goes back into kind of the fall of man and this original sin. So Christians, which interestingly enough are the only religion that believes in original sin, but Christians talk about this original sin, which comes from the fall of man, from this disobedience with God, or from this sin that happened that gave man a sin nature, to where now they have to be saved. They can know this sin can't be with God because God's perfect, right? So in heaven you can't have sin. So how do you get to heaven with sin? It's like you need Jesus to save you from your sins. Jesus lived a perfect life. And, his sacrifice and resurrection shows that, and that's kind of how we're saved, right? This is kind of base Christianity, what's going on with all that. Okay, so, yeah, we have this original sin, and Jesus fulfills the Jewish Messiah prophecy, right? So he fulfills this prophecy, and Christians are all happy about that. Okay, so let's go into this a little bit more. Now, if we go back to what we talked about previously with reincarnation, it throws a bit of a monkey wrench at the whole original sin story. Because if we have reincarnation, and if we don't only have one life or one afterlife, it then kind of makes it to where, like, well, maybe this original sin thing just isn't that important then, because it's like, why does it matter? Because I'm going to not only live there eternally. It's like I'll just come back and incarnate again. Maybe I can correct it, or maybe I can change it, or maybe I can do something different again. And that is kind of what's going on. This is why when we brought in our understanding, it changes the way we view things. So now we kind of have to reassess the Jesus story and this original sin story and what that's all talking about. Okay, so this is where we get into kind of a deeper interpretation of this original sin. So with the fallen man story, you have this like disobedience story. But if you look into it more deeply and you kind of compare it to other notes, you can kind of see more clearly what's going on here. And again, I'm not saying this is the only interpretation or this is right, but I'm saying this is a much higher resolution and a better way to look at it for, I think, most people. So this original sin, it talks about in this story where Eve ate of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. Okay, so this is talking about this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You have this knowledge aspect and you have this good and evil aspect. This good and evil is representing duality. Duality is like contrast, right? It's this spectrum of possibilities. And in this physical world, we have good and evil, right? Where in the spiritual world, I think you don't hear about that as much, or it's like only good or something like that. There's no sin in the spiritual world, right? So in this physical world, you have this duality. You have good and evil, good and bad. And people have the ability to make choices. And from my understanding with this story, it's basically talking about how people now have this ability to make choices, to go through and experience this third density drama and kind of learn and to grow and to evolve your consciousness and to expand. And that's kind of what's going on here. It's like you are born into this physical world of good and evil. You're born into this third density environment where you have the ability to make choices and you have the ability to make mistakes and to mess up and to distance yourself from God or from truth. And this is, from my understanding, kind of what is going on in this story of the fallen man. You have this ability to make choices, to make mistakes, to be like God, to have this higher power capacity to do something. It's not like you're just like some robot that only knows one way. Now you have moral agency and the ability to have power over your own choices and to not just do good because you're told it, but do good because you choose it, because you know what that is, what that means. This is kind of the deeper meaning of what this story is talking about. And this is, from my understanding, more what is going on with original sin and what that even means. It's not some bad thing. It's not like you're damned and you're sinned because you disobeyed. It's like, no, the sin is the ability to make choices and the ability to experience polarity, duality. That is the sin. It's no sin at all. It's not bad. It's life. It's third density physical life. So that's what's going on here, right? So then Jesus now is the piece that saves us from this, right? So then how does Jesus save us from this, and what is really going on here? Do we need to be saved? Okay, so as NDEs show us, we create our own realities, right? We hold the cards to determine where we end up and what happens with our lives, right? There's not a judge that says, like, you didn't do it according to what I wanted. It's like, we're the judge. That's what NDEs show us. This is what, meditation and these other ways of accessing the afterlife talk about. It's like, we're the judge, we create our own reality, and we're the ones who hold the cards. So I'm just kind of giving you this higher level interpretation just to kind of like get you going. I know it's probably a lot to take in, but like hold on with that for a little bit and let's continue on now with a little bit more on Jesus. Okay, like I talked about earlier, what are we trying to accomplish with religion? Why are we here? What are we doing? Are we trying to follow rules and be obedient to God? Or are we trying to evolve ourselves and become better people? Are we trying to become more like aware, more conscious? Are we trying to fit within this like rigid box of some system that we're supposed to follow? Or are we supposed to kind of go outside the box and to experience like more broadly and to see new things and to have new ideas and be more creative? It's like, what really are we doing here? Because I think with a lot of people, we have kind of training wheels with religion, but training wheels hinder you at a point. You need to remove the training wheels to where you can kind of go full speed and you no longer need to be bound up by these training wheels. So it's like, we need to ask ourselves, what we're trying to accomplish. Do we want comfort? Do we want training wheels, or do we want the truth? Do we want to actually have understanding? Do we want to actually know, what's going on and like see more clearly, have a higher resolution? So I think this is what's going on with these concepts. And now it's interesting because I think with a lot of Christians, so most Christians, I think people know, are like more conservative, and they're kind of not fans of socialism, right? So socialism in general, like redistributing wealth or like giving somebody something, like giving somebody a fish versus teaching somebody to fish. Most Christians, and I think rightfully so, are not big fans of that. It's like Christians would rather teach somebody how to fish. They don't want to just give them the fish. So it's interesting because when it comes to things like Jesus, Christians kind of go against their principles, where Christians no longer want to be like Jesus. They want to have Jesus like give them the free pass into heaven. So Jesus is like a ticket into heaven, and they pawn off their responsibility rather than taking responsibility themselves and learning how to fish, learning how to be better people. They just say, you know what, Jesus will pick up the slack where I fall short. And they kind of take like a more socialist approach there, where they're putting the work on somebody else rather than taking the work and the responsibility themselves. And it's an interesting thing to think about, because they are going against their core principles with self-responsibility, with the Jesus story. It's like they don't believe in giving people things without people earning them, yet they believe in this grace. They believe in going to heaven without earning that. They believe in Jesus doing something for you rather than you doing it yourself. Now, this contradiction, I think, can be straightened out when we look more into the Jesus story and what's really being said here. So this is where I think it gets really interesting and important. Okay, so with Jesus, yes, Jesus does save us, right? Jesus is our salvation, and Jesus is our way to heaven. But what is Jesus really? What is Jesus representing? Because from my research and understanding, and a good way to look at this is Jesus is a metaphor, right? Jesus is, yes, you have this physical life and this physical stuff, and the miracles and whatnot. You have that going on, but in a higher level, you have Jesus as a metaphor. And I think most people know that Jesus, or people have probably come across information of Jesus being a sun god, and Jesus being worshipped, as a sun god and this type of thing. And the same type of story, the same type of sun god that happened in stories that predate Vatican Christianity. You have Mithraism, Zoroastrianism, and different religions where they have a similar sun god type concept, where they're a savior god and they save people. And so this gets into now, what is a sun god? Why the sun? What's so important about the sun? And the sun is another very interesting symbol, and it's like the most widely used symbol throughout history, ancient history. And there's a big reason why. It's like, why is the sun so important? What's a sun god? Why is the sun always used? And here's the thing. The sun is a great metaphor, again, for spiritual and intellectual enlightenment. And this is why Jesus is a symbol of the sun, because Jesus represents spiritual and intellectual enlightenment. And that is the main part of Jesus. And that's why Jesus saves you. This is kind of the higher level interpretation, the more metaphoric interpretation of what's going on with the Bible story. Jesus saves you not in the physical sense because he's a physical person and somebody disobeyed God and now he atones for your sins. It's like he saves you because he represents spiritual and intellectual enlightenment, which brings you away from darkness and into light. This brings you into higher consciousness and higher understanding. And that is what this is all talking about, in my most humble opinion. I'm just giving you my take, but I have looked at it quite a bit, so I need to kind of share this. I need to get it out. Okay, so that's what's going on. This story isn't about a physical person. It's about the evolution of your consciousness. It's about this, duality and going through life and evolving your consciousness through different choices and things that you experience, and becoming aware and becoming more enlightened spiritually, intellectually, having personal responsibility and taking power over yourselves. So you're moving away from religion, right, and becoming more spiritual. You're moving away from having other people tell you what's right and wrong and how to live. And you now are determining it yourself, and you're having your own power, and you're seeing, how you can create your own reality. This is what's going on with this topic. And it's interesting because the sun is an important symbol. Why the sun? The sun has light. The sun represents light. The sun gives out light, right? And light is an important metaphor because light always means good. Light means good. You can see with light. Light means wisdom. It's a good metaphor for this type of thing. Like when you are trying to learn something and it finally clicks, you'll say like, oh, I finally saw the light. It's like you're using light to represent a mental improvement in understanding. Light represents this, and it's not by a mistake that's the metaphor, right? And it's interesting because too much light at once can be blinding. Like if you're sleeping and you're well asleep and somebody turns on the lights, it hurts your eyes. You're like, oh man, turn that off. Too much light can be blinding. And if you're living in darkness and you experience light, it can be a bad thing, right? So if you're in darkness, you're sleeping, and light hits you, it can be very blinding, it can be very painful, and it can be something that you don't want and you want to turn off and go away from. And this is directly analogous to what's going on with consciousness and information. When somebody hits you with more information and tells you something, it can be, the light, you don't want to see the light. You want to get away from it because it's hurting you. It's blinding. You don't have the capacity, your eyes don't have the capacity for that intensity yet. It's too intense for you. So you need the low level version. You need the dumbed down version. It's like, I don't want that much light. So that's what's going on here with the Jesus story. It's like what Paul says, where he talks about how with the children, you give them the milk, because that's all they can digest, right? They can't handle the meat. They can't handle the heavy stuff, So you give people information relative to the intensity that they can handle. And with people, most people get the low intensity Jesus story. And it's interesting because the Jesus story is talking about this exact concept of consciousness growth and spiritual enlightenment, intellectual enlightenment, personal responsibility. It's talking about all this stuff. And this is a very important topic because it's like the topic of life itself. It's the topic of evolution of your consciousness and self-responsibility over your own power. And that is, in my humblest opinion, what the Jesus story is talking about that nobody really wants to talk about. And that's why when you look at it from a higher resolution, it's no longer now a problem to say I believe in Jesus. Because it's like, yeah, I believe in Jesus because Jesus represents at the highest level, not some man or some Christian religion. He represents spiritual and intellectual enlightenment. He represents the the search for truth. He represents you creating your own reality, evolving your own consciousness. That is what's going on here. And that is this whole sun god story. That's what the sun represents. That's why they use the sun. These things aren't accidents. And these are high level interpretations and symbols that are used by, people that get this and use it for a particular reason. So yeah, that is, he even says it, in the verse I said. He says, I speak to them in parables. He says, I speak for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. He's not talking about physical eyes. He's talking about third eyes, right? He's not talking about physical ears. He's talking about intuition. He's talking about people that can see through things, that people that just don't take the physical, literal, 5 sense interpretation of stuff. He's talking about people that can truly grasp the depth of what he's saying and just, who have that high resolution ability to capture it and to run with it. And for the other people, they get the parable low resolution version, and that's what they run with, right? And the low resolution version are going to have contradictions and problems. And that's what happens with people, and that's why they kind of get turned away from religion. But when you look at the high level interpretations from the actual people that kind of know what's going on or research it more, you get an interpretation that fits in with everything else. Now you start to see how science kind of fits in better now. It's not totally contradicting science now. Now it's not totally contradicting other religions. It's not contradicting near-death experiences. Everything's fitting together. And you're starting to see how this all kind of ties together at a higher level, but when you break it down into like a low level fractal, it's not as good now. It's not going to make as much sense. The low resolution version, of course, is not going to make sense. It's not supposed to, and that's why there's going to be contradictions, and that's what's going on here. So hopefully with that, it's starting to make a little bit more sense, and as you know, this shows, hopefully you're starting to see the light, because that's exactly what this is talking about. It's about being able to handle more light and a higher intensity, being able to kind of see the light. That's why people use these terms. Okay, so with that said, there's one other part that I want to go into, which is that of God in the afterlife. Because it's like once we're starting to outgrow religion and kind of see past the afterlife and Jesus and things like this, we kind of have a better understanding of what's going on here. It's like, okay, well then do we throw God away? It's like, well, why don't we just get rid of God then? Why don't we get rid of, because I mean, if you're able to split up, so we can split up religion and like afterlife. These two don't necessarily go together. You can get rid of religion and still keep the afterlife. So it's like if we remove God in the afterlife, we have afterlife. Most people think you need to have God to have an afterlife, and most people think if you don't have God, you don't have an afterlife. But it's like, well, if we can still have an afterlife without God, so then now do we need God? Do we need to believe in God? Like, does he exist? And it's not my intention to say one way or the other on that. I think there's a God or type of thing. That's a huge discussion. What is God? Whatever. I'm not saying you throw that away, but I'm just saying what you need to do is you need to view it at a high resolution. You need to split it into individual components that can now be assessed individually on their own merit rather than grouping everything together. So you don't take Judgment Day, you don't take heaven and hell, you don't take afterlife, you don't take religion and put it all into one and say this is all together. Because now it's like you can't get rid of one without getting rid of the other. You don't want to do that. You want to have a high resolution. You want to say Judgment Day is its own independent thing outside of the afterlife. And it's like you can still have an afterlife without a Judgment Day, so that's not a problem. You can still have an afterlife without a heaven or hell. It's like you could split it into individual components, and that's kind of the basis of what I want to share in this video. It's like when you have a problem understanding something or something's not making sense, you probably need to break it into smaller pieces and to view it at a higher resolution to where you can refine it. That's how you refine it. You allow yourself to discard one piece that doesn't fit, but still keep the piece that does fit. Because most of us with our religions, we have core parts that fit. Like, you know, there's very like truth-based things. Like most people with religion, like they believe in God and they believe like there is a God, and that's like a hard one to get rid of. And yeah, you shouldn't get rid of that, but that doesn't mean you have to hold all these other pieces that also weigh you down. It's like you can still believe in God without believing in religion. You can still believe in God without believing other stuff. You can still believe in an afterlife without believing in religion. So it's like you can get rid of certain things, but still keep the true parts. You can keep the components. And that's kind of what I'm showing here. That's like the main thing I want to get across, because it helps you see how you want to work with concepts now. You can understand how you're going to view them and work with them to where you can get more clarity. You can have a better understanding and be comfortable and at peace with what you're, working with. Okay, so that's kind of what's going on here. And that's the main thing I want to get across. Because all this stuff shouldn't make our lives more difficult. It should make it better. We shouldn't become more fearful when we gain in clarity. We shouldn't be more confused. We shouldn't be more hateful or angry. This should all make us better people, and it should be liberating and fun and enjoyable to take in new information that helps clear things up. And that's kind of the main thing. It's like, what more do we want out of life than to gain in love and in wisdom and in peace? That is the main mission. And if by gaining in clarity and resolution we're doing that, then we're doing something right. So that's what I want to get across in this. And hopefully it was valuable to you. Now, if you like this information, I also have a book where I kind of go into this in a little bit different way, somewhat. It's called Rule by Ignorance. You can go to slayermint.com and you can read the book for free there. And you can also read it for free on this YouTube channel. There's an audiobook for it, and you can just listen to me babbling on about stuff. So that's something you can do if you want more information on this. And let me know if you want me to do more videos like this or go into more detail on certain topics on this, because I'm really into this kind of stuff a lot. But I also, of course, like business and other topics too. So let me know. And please subscribe if you like it. Leave a comment. like the video, tell your friends, share it with them, and hopefully this is valuable information, because to me, this is like one of the most important topics to me. This is something I've spent a lot of time on, and I think I have something to offer here, and I think it would help people the same way coming across this when I was younger helped me, and it was just like, it like blew my mind. So there you go. Thanks for listening, and have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.